Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us to this month's The Doctor's In Call. And as usual, I'm joined by Anna Damato and Ryan Dunnegan from our sub-advisor in St. Louis to the Life Sciences and Healthcare Fund, Kennedy Capital Management. Anna and Ryan, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having us. Good afternoon.
Before we dive into the three stocks that are on your mind this morning, um, there's been some talk here recently about the FDA having some real concerns about, disclosure of side effects to certain drugs that have been out there. And I'm just wondering if either one of you could comment on that and kind of weigh in on what's going on at the moment there.
Yeah, that's definitely the news of the week. With the FDA commissioner writing a piece in a magazine, healthcare focused magazine, targeting misleading pharmaceutical ads. And so you may remember from the first Trump administration, they did try to target pharmaceutical advertising, and that went through the court system, and it was ruled due to freedom of speech that the advertisements could continue. So this is a different way for the administration to approach it. And essentially, they're saying, hey, these ads, as you can see from the pictures here, depict patients who are happy and smiling and hula hooping, and they distract from all of these side effects that these drugs do have. And the pharmaceutical industry is not doing a good enough job highlighting the risks to taking some of these medications, or they're just highlighting a few of the key risks and leaving the others sort of off the table and telling a patient, hey, go to our website, call us, and then we'll give you the full list. But for this 30-second advertisement, let's just focus on, how happy these people are. And so the administration is saying we need to crack down on that. And in the article from the FDA commissioner actually cites, if you go back to, I think 2023, there was only one letter sent to a pharmaceutical company saying, "Hey, your advertisement is really out of bounds." In 2024, there were no letters sent to pharmaceutical companies saying this. So the administration is stepping up their enforcement, being more proactive in targeting these advertisements.
Well, hopefully nobody's guaranteeing that you'd ever be able to successfully negotiate a hula hoop. Um, but
I
anyway,
hope
no.
I hope not. I hope not. If you remember back to last year's Super Bowl, actually, there's an advertisement from a company called Hims and Hers, which is an online pharmacy platform. These are becoming more and more common. I think we've all seen the ads. And they were advertising for GLP-1s, for compounded GLP-1s, and they made no mention of side effects. And so that's specifically cited as one of the reasons that the administration is targeting these companies. From a stock selection perspective, we think it's interesting because it opens the door maybe to some other providers who target physicians through advertisements. So how do pharmaceutical companies directly target doctors, nurses, et cetera, as opposed just to the consumer? So maybe a different avenue for drug spend to head down and an opportunity for some other companies in the industry.
All right, good. Well, definitely something to keep our eye on here. So thanks for that. And speaking of stocks, I know that there's three that you'd like to highlight. So if I'm correct, Anna, the first one is Ionis.
Yeah, that's correct. And we have three stocks today. So we're going to start with Ionis, which is one where they recently had good data, and we're excited about future data updates in the future. And then we'll go through another where they recently had good data, but there's nothing else for a year or so, and talk about how we might handle something like that. And then talk about one that has had recent negative data actually just this morning. So very timely, and talk about how we would handle a stock like that. Each one is a very unique story, not codependent at all. And so the first one, Ionis Pharmaceuticals, we do have the stock chart for each one of these in the top left, or sorry, in the top right, which you can see
Yep.
the recent jump for Ionis. This is from a phase 3 data readout. So this is the final phase before submitting to the FDA for approval. And the indication they're in is hypertriglyceridemia, which means you have very high triglycerides, abnormally high. And what this does is actually over time, it kind of wears down your pancreas, and your pancreas can get very inflamed. And this is called acute pancreatitis. And these events can be fatal to patients. Even if a patient survives one AP event, acute pancreatitis, they're then prone to have more, which can then essentially the risk of mortality increases with each attack. And so the Ionis data not only showed great reduction of these triglycerides, slightly above expectations. So they showed 72% reduction of triglycerides versus prior studies had shown about 60%. So better than expected there, but pretty similar. The really amazing headline here is in the box at the bottom left, which is the 85% reduction in the risk of acute pancreatitis. So this is actually the first study to show protection from these events in this patient population. And so now, the investors in this stock are going from, okay, we think that this is a good drug. It's already had good data in phase 2 to saying, okay, this is a great drug that could be used in a lot more patients. And so that's why the stock moved in the way that it did. And you can see from the prevalent population description, there's over 3 million people living with this condition. And so prior, we were thinking maybe the market was about 1 million people. And now we're thinking, oh, it could actually be much larger. And then thinking about, yeah, go ahead.
Is this something that can impact treatment of type 1 and type 2 diabetes?
It is not, although a lot of patients who have high triglycerides may also have other comorbidities such as high triglycerides. So patients with type 2 diabetes may also use this drug, but it does not directly treat those conditions. Yeah, good question. And so this is an example of a larger company that has a multi-asset portfolio with a pipeline that's going to have multiple data readouts over the next 12 months that are not this asset, right? So this is one where, yes, they had positive data, but a lot of investors are probably sticking it out because there's more data coming in less than 6 months and then even more coming after that for different assets. So again, a large portfolio here.
Great.
And then our second example is Report Pharmaceuticals. And this is an example of a company that's much smaller, much earlier stage than an Ionis, for example, which does not have that kind of diversified portfolio. And so recently, this stock had very good data in epilepsy. However, afterwards, the stock sold off, not only because they had a massive capital raise, which was necessary to continue operations of the company for years to come, but also they have this catalyst desert, data desert, we call it sometimes jokingly, where there's no updates for a long time. And when there's no updates, stocks in this sort of area of biotech tend to drift because it's the data that's exciting. So I'll walk you through the data quickly, and then we'll move on to our third example. So here they were testing a brand new modality in epilepsy. And so instead of targeting the receptor itself, which contributes to brain cell activity or hyperactivity, which causes the seizures, they're actually going for proteins around these receptors. And so the reason they do this is that these proteins that are surrounding the receptor are tissue specific, whereas the receptor itself can be expressed throughout your entire body. So for example, a currently approved drug for seizures can have side effects like disruptions in your gait. So walking becomes harder. You can't operate heavy machinery. You may feel dizzy. You may fall over because you have the combination of dizziness and poor coordination. And so it can be really debilitating, but the drugs are necessary to prevent those seizures, right?
Yeah.
Whereas this drug, being localized, having localized activity to the brain, has fewer of those full body side effects. And so you still get to prevent the seizures. Their data was great, but they had lower rates of these things like changes in gait and poor coordination. And so that's why it was so exciting, because it's a completely new modality with better safety.
Terrific.
But again, small company, no pipeline. So this was it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the third example is sort of heartbreaking, right? For the company and for the patients. You can see that the stock is down over 80% today, again, on data disclosed this morning, so very timely. And this was a phase 3 trial in a condition called sarcoidosis. And this is a chronic condition. It's immune driven. These patients have progressive fibrosis of the lungs and other organs, which causes their dysfunction. So it's a tragic condition to start. And then the other part of the story is that there's nothing really to treat them. And so they're currently treated with generic oral steroids, which work to suppress the inflammation that causes that scarring and fibrosis. However, as many of our listeners may know, chronic high-dose steroids can be very detrimental in other ways. So they can cause cardiometabolic disease, weight gain, immunosuppression leads to repeat infections, things like that. And so it's really burdensome for that treatment to be chronic, as it is in this condition. And so Atire's goal in this phase 3 trial was to show that they could actually wean patients off their steroids or decrease their dose and still reduce that inflammation and improve quality of life. And they did show that, except that their placebo group showed it too. So the placebo group actually outperformed expectations to the point where their primary endpoint of the study, what they needed for it to be successful for an FDA submission, was not met. Instead, it seems like oral steroids work pretty well at a lower dose as long as doctors and patients are communicating more frequently. So in this study, they did every 2 weeks. In the real world, it would be every 3 to 6 months more likely. So just an example of how a treatment paradigm can make all the difference in a clinical trial.
I think this is a good example too, Mike, of how magnified stocks can move when it's a single portfolio company. You
Yeah,
know, for
right.
ATYR, this is really their key asset. And with the phase 3 failure, you see the magnitude of effect. With RAP, again, it could eventually be a broader product, but really in one indication so far, and you see the magnitude on the upside. And so when we think about stocks to own, it's managing position size, managing these data events, and whereas contrast that to an Ionis, where it's a broad portfolio. So if that drug were not to have been as successful as it was, there's a backstop there, and you're not looking at a stock that's down 80%. And so you have to understand the differences and the nuances between these companies.
Right. Right. So we've got a couple of minutes left, and obviously the Fed's meeting this week. It's all but certain that they're going to be lowering, which is probably good news for this space overall. But I'm kind of curious on how you see it. Obviously, uh, we've continued to really be very committed in talking about the M&A that we think is going to continue in this space because of patent protections, coming due. Just kind of talk in a general sense for what you see happening with what we think is kind of a foregone conclusion with this coming on Wednesday.
Yeah, it's always hard to tell what the immediate effect will be. Has the market already priced in? We're sitting here talking about a rate cut. I mean, the market clearly knows this is coming. Um, is it 25 bip cut priced in? Is it closer to 50? What's the near term? I'm not going to try to call a near term reaction, but I think historically lower rates have been good for biotech. And you mentioned M&A in the space. We would expect that to continue, maybe less so from a rate standpoint and more so from a lot of large pharma has end of life coming on some very important drugs for them, and they need to backfill the pipelines. And they have to manage this through debt and the cash they're generating. And so there's a mix of companies who have money to spend. There are some who are a little more burdened with debt, and they don't have the ammunition to go after biotechs. But there's definitely going to be an appetite over the next number of years. We expect that to remain fairly consistent, although it ebbs and flows. You tend to see a couple of deals, and then a few months go by and you don't hear anything. But we would expect a steady cadence of deals over time from large pharma dipping down into small biotech. It continues to be the R&D engine of the industry. That's not going to change. And with lower rates, we'll see if capital begins to flow again into biotech. Coming out of COVID, in COVID, coming out of COVID, it's pretty easy to raise money if you were a biotech.
Right.
There are a lot of biotechs that were started during that time period. There are a lot of biotechs that maybe were running too many trials during that time frame because they had capital on the balance sheet, and when they needed to get capital, it was readily available. It's become more difficult over the past 12 months plus to get capital, but good science generally finds capital, and will get funded. And so we expect this is over time, likely a net positive to the biotechnology space with rates coming down. But at the same time, we think it's going to be more of the same. Good science will prevail. These patients will get treatment, they'll get paid for, and big pharma will be hunting.
Great. Well, we're going to have to leave it there for now. So, Anna and Ryan, thank you both for joining us. And thank you to our audience for joining us this month. We look forward to having you back next month, where we talk again about 3 stocks to watch on The Doctor Is In. And for now, I'm Mike Flaherty. Thanks again. Bye-bye.